YouTube. Mr. Gibson Guy here. Welcome to my garage. We're going to have some fun today. Today we're looking at, the title would be, the greatest motorcycle of all time. The working title, of course, being more involved, would be the most historically significant and influential motorcycle of all time. And the motorcycles actually would be plural. So, let's take a look at why would I say something like this. Most important motorcycle, greatest motorcycle of all time. What could it be? Well, the whole historical development of the motorcycle in the world goes back well over 100 years now. First motorcycles were bicycles, and they put little motors on them. And then they put a little bit bigger motor, and then they made the motorcycle a little bit bigger, the bicycle, and eventually they lost their pedals. But the motorcycle came from the bicycle with a motor, and for most of its first 50 years of development, it was based on the engineering for a bicycle. But as time passed in the 20th century, we paved roads, we increased our engineering, and motorcycles started to be developed as motorcycles, not as just an offshoot of a bicycle. They got front and rear suspensions, they got front and rear brakes that worked, they got larger, more powerful engines, and they became much more competent machines as something completely separated from a bicycle, which is where they came from originally. Now, the motorcycle of its day was just basic transportation. A lot of people in the early 20th century considered motorcycles and motor cars to be interchangeable. And they were just used to get around on what limited roads there were. But when we got more roads and we got better motorcycles, we discovered that the motorcycles could be made for more than just basic transportation. And so we look at the late 40s and early 1950s, we see the two real strong motorcycle companies were Harley-Davidson in the US and Triumph in Great Britain. Harley-Davidson had developed a very large, sturdy motorcycle meant to hold saddlebags and passengers and windshields and sidecars and all kinds of things that could be added on. And their motorcycles were made for going for long rides on extended trips. Triumph, coming from England, being a smaller company, didn't have the room for such big trips. And their motorcycles were a little bit smaller, but also more nimble, better handling, not made to carry as much stuff on them, but definitely a very important motorcycle and a very successful motorcycle. And after the war, Edward Turner, the head of Triumph, decided that Triumph needed to make a spot in the US marketplace. And so right after the war ended, he started exporting Triumphs to the US, competing with Harley-Davidson. Indian was already on its way out, and Harley thought it was going to have a monopoly. And what happened pretty shortly was Triumph Speed Twins and Triumph Thunderbirds started cutting into the market for Harleys because they were more nimble, they handled better, they had better brakes, and they were faster. So Harley started suffering in the whole PR department because people were looking at Harleys as big road cruisers, but not as very sporty bikes, now that there was a new market for sporty bikes just developing. So Harley went to work, and they came out with, in 1957, the Harley-Davidson Sportster. The Sportster was truly the Harley-Davidson, but it was completely the most modern bike they had. It was smaller than the other Harleys. It was lighter than the other Harleys. It had a little bit smaller engine. And basically, it came down to the Sportster was Harley's version of a Triumph Thunderbird. And it was meant to compete directly with the Thunderbird, which it did very successfully. In its first year of production, the Sportster nearly doubled the sales of the K-Series, Harley's middleweight bike that was directly competing with the Triumphs at the time. Well, Triumph saw Harley coming back into the new sporting market and decided they had to have something better than their Thunderbird, so they needed to update it as quickly as possible. So rather than develop a whole new model, Triumph took the existing Thunderbird, stripped it down, streamlined it, souped it up, and they came out with the Triumph Bonneville in 1959, 2 years after the Sportster appeared. And now we have two purpose-built sporting motorcycles. The first motorcycles that really fit into that category. In fact, the Triumph Bonneville and the Harley-Davidson Sportster were the first superbikes. They were the ones that led to the beginning of sport motorcycles rather than just transportation scooters or highway cruisers. And whatever motorcycle you ride now, it has a lot of Triumph Bonneville and Harley Sportster in it. So these two motorcycles have the most illustrious history in motorcycles, part of what makes them the greatest. The Sportster came out in '57. It's been around ever since. This is 2014. That makes the Sportster 57 years old and still just as popular or more popular than ever. The Triumph Bonneville has an even more interesting history. It came out in 1959, and now 2014, that was 55 years ago, and it's still going strong. The Triumph, and unlike the uninterrupted line of the Sportster, completely went out of production when Triumph went out of business. Then they came back, put Bonnevilles back in production for a few years in the 80s, and then they stopped it again, closed down. And then in the 90s, Triumph came back as a new company, and in 2000 came out with the new Bonneville. So is that still a Bonneville? Well, the original Ironhead Sportster of '57 was a long ways from the blockhead, all aluminum top Evolution Sportster that we have today. By the same token, the 865cc double overhead cam twin on the Triumph today is a bit of a stretch from that original separate unit and separate engine transmission construction of the '59 Bonneville. But I would consider that to be an evolution Bonneville, just as this is an evolution Sportster. So we have bikes which date back nearly 60 years, still going strong, still two of the most popular motorcycles going, and probably the most competent. They also happen to be the motorcycles which are two of the best riding bikes. You can take some sort of a super sports crotch rocket today, and if you ride on it for more than an hour, you're going to be miserable. You're going to want to jump off of it because it's so uncomfortable to ride. Then again, you could have a big twin or any of the clones and ride that all day, but if you're going to try to ride it to the store, it's too much work just to get it out of the garage. So I would say these are the most established and longest running and most appropriate, the best motorcycles that were ever made. All right, well, I'm going to leave the comment section below, so you let me know what you think. I could have said a lot more, but I'm going to leave it at that. And time to stop talking and start riding. This is Mr. Gibson Guy. So long.